So we raise a pointed finger of protest and say, the example I use in the book is, I'm on the couch, Jenny walks in, the kitchen's overflowing with dirty dishes. She protests and says, well, I guess you don't care about the dishes. And notice the problem with a protest is it always elevates the situation to be more emotional than what just the situation in and of itself would be, because that's born from what's going on below the table.
This is Ryan and Michelle, and welcome to the Celebrate MarriageCast, where we hope to restore and reclaim godly marriages through honest and real conversations.
Hello, and welcome to our show. We are so glad that you're joining us today for episode 124. We are so close to another quarter of 100 in this second round here.
Awesome.
That's so great. Well, we have a fun show today. We are bringing a real treat for you, our listeners. Thank you for joining us as we bring these resources to you. We have a friend of the Marriage Cast and an author and a pastor joining us today. We have Kevin A. Thompson. I want to share a little bit about who he is before we chat with him, because we're really bringing you a great resource here, and we're loving this book. We've loved reading it, and I think that you're going to love hearing about it. So Kevin A. Thompson is a husband, a father, global marriage pastor, and campus pastor at Bayside Church in the greater Sacramento region. He's the author of multiple books, and if his name sounds familiar or these titles sound familiar, it is because they are familiar to you. We talk about them all the time here at Celebrate, especially friends, partners, and lovers. Fearless Families, and the book that we talked about on the show last time, Stay in Your Lane. Kevin is passionate about seeing families thrive. He's originally from Arkansas. Kevin has been a frequent guest of Focus on the Family Life, and featured in the New York Times. He writes at kevinathompson.com and changetheodds.com. He and his wife, Jenny, along with their 2 children, reside in Auburn, California. And like I said, we last interviewed Kevin in April of 2024. We talked about Stay in Your Lane, which is a phenomenal book. We were going through some life changes with our daughter going to college, and that was such a great resource for us at the time. And we are excited to welcome you back to our show, Kevin. Hello.
Hey, Ryan, Michelle, so great to be with you. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for being here, and congratulations on this book today. We were talking about love styles, and you guys, I love that the show we're kicking off February, right? The month of love, and we're talking about a really great resource. So congrats on your new book.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun it's always fun whenever you take something that you work on so privately for so long and then release it out into the public. So it's fun to finally talk about it.
Amazing.
Yeah, Kevin, we're excited. We're excited to kind of dig into the book. It was such an amazing book. Both of us really enjoyed it, and it sort of was one of those that kind of blew my mind a little bit, if I'm being honest here. And we're going to talk kind of a high level overview, but the book really dives into who we are and how we behave. And I think that's what kind of blew my mind. So I'm really excited to dive into this book.
Ryan actually said when he finished it, he said, I'm going to have to go back through this and take my time with this and go and write more detailed notes. Yeah. And there were several parts where I thought, you know what, I really, that has played out in our house. We'll get to that. We'll share which conversation you stole from the O'Connor household. But so the book is called Love Styles, Why You Love the Way You Do and How to Change It. And Kevin, just to start us off, it revolves around something that you call attachment theory. So can you give our listeners an overview of what this is and how that impacts our relationships?
Yeah, so I really hope the book is maybe the simplest explanation of attachment theory from a Christian perspective. So attachment theory, 1950s, 1960s, secular psychology, John Bowlby, eventually Mary Ainsworth, came to this conclusion that how we view ourselves, others, and God really is shaped in the first couple of years of life by how our needs are met. And what I love about attachment theory is I think in many ways it's a great secular explanation of what changed between Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. And the idea that now we are raised as imperfect beings being raised by imperfect people. Clearly, there are going to be times in which we have needs that those needs go unmet. No matter who we are, no matter how great our parents are, those needs are going to go unmet. And how do our brains interpret when those needs are not met and it impacts our lives even today? I could say in part In part, this is my personal reflection of how my parents' divorce impacts my life today. And then the beautiful thing of it is, as you begin to figure out who am I and how did I become me, it empowers you to actually take control of your own life and to begin to change it. So you can actually make the argument that Love Styles is the prequel to Stay in Your Lane. Because if you struggle to stay in your lane, chances are you're not really controlling yourself. You're not emotionally regulated. And yet, whenever you can become emotionally regulated, then you have the power to actually stay in your lane.
I thought the book made so much sense in even thinking about different situations that we've dealt with and even people we know that I was like, that actually, it makes a lot of sense. And from what you explained, these can be life events that impact you when you're very, very young. And in some of the examples, the people didn't even remember that they had happened, or they were babies or toddlers at the time, that there was maybe chaos in their house, or it's not that their parents weren't trying to do a good job. Of course, they were in most of those situations. It's just maybe they were working a lot and there was a little more, the kid was left on their own, or it was really chaotic with some mental disorders that the parents had, or things like that that impacted and now is playing out in their lives as an adult. And I thought that was really fascinating to realize that that could impact an adult so much later on in their life.
Yeah, and we all have wounds. I mean, that's just the reality. And chances are for all of us, the greatest wounds in our lives were caused by people who were supposed to love us and didn't. Now, here's the thing, that doesn't mean they weren't trying to. And so many of your listeners might have a story very similar to mine. My parents would never do anything to harm me at all. They loved me tremendously. But love is more than just intention. Love is also ability and skill and availability. And let's face it, whenever we're young, my parents had their own friction going on within their relationships. My dad's career was taking off. My mom working outside the home as a teacher, also taking care of my sister and I, all the cultural, economic situations that would go on. You can see how just because somebody wants to love you well doesn't mean in every case that they're going to. I can look at my own family, and you think about my youngest son, right? Whenever he was born into life, he has an older sister with special needs. Obviously, I work hard at the church and I write books. My wife owns an advertising company. During the first few years of his life, my grandparents who lived next door both died. They were very integral to our family. My wife's father died dramatically in just an 8-week span with a brain tumor. And is it possible that there were times that my son had needs that went unmet and unseen? Obviously, that's the case. Not by any lack of intention of us, but just life itself sometimes gets in the way. Well, then his brain begins to interpret that, and it begins to shape how he views himself, how he views other people, and ultimately how he views God. And so we all have these wounds in our lives that still impact us today, but for most of us, we don't recognize that that's going on.
So, Kevin, in the book, you describe two types. There's two types of attachment: secure versus non-secure. Maybe describe to our listeners maybe what each of these are, what that looks like.
Yeah, so we start with this basic dichotomy of secure and non-secure. Some of your listeners might be listening going, wait a second, there's 4 types of attachment, or there's more. But I like to start with this very basic premise of you have secure and non-secure. So secure is what we would think about a very healthy approach to ourselves, others, and God. Ultimately, I think it's the picture of Jesus, that Jesus is the epitome of what secure attachment actually looks like. So this is the idea: I can recognize my own needs. I can meet many of those needs myself. I can trust that other people can help me in meeting those needs. If somebody fails to help me, I don't take it personally. It's not a shot at my own identity. I always joke with people that everybody probably has at least one secure attachment in their lives if they own a dog. Because you're probably securely attached to your dog. If you get home today and your dog has destroyed your favorite pillow, you're upset, you're frustrated, but you don't then think, this dog did that intentionally to hurt me. And then you don't think to yourself, I'm going to show this dog how bad they are. I'm not going to talk to them for the next 3 days. Nobody gives their dog the silent treatment. And yet, if your spouse says the wrong thing today in the wrong tone, it's possible that your house might be quiet for the next 3 days. And so I think we're all securely attached to some people in some situations. It's a really healthy, adult, mature picture of what love is and supposed to be, and Jesus is the epitome of it. But then we also all have at least one of these non-secure pathways. And this is where, from our wounding now, we're wrongly interpreting what is going to present the life that we actually desire and the love that we want. And then within that non-secure viewpoint, now you have these three different types of expressions. You have an anxious pathway, an avoidant pathway, and a disorganized pathway. And while they express themselves in radically different ways, the truth of the matter is they're all the same thing. They're all non-secure forms and pathways of love, which are promising us some element of connection, of life, but they never result in the very thing that we think they're going to provide us.
Kevin, do you have some examples you can give to our listeners, just really quick, of maybe some of those areas, just so that they can kind of picture what this looks like and plays out in real life?
Yeah, so I would say I'm very securely attached to my daughter who's 20. She has Down syndrome. Man, I can speak truth to her. I love her completely. I'm generally unmoved by her response in the moment because my love and care for her outweighs any tears in the moment. I'm compassionate and empathetic toward her, and yet I don't take her responses personally in any way. I would say I now have that kind of pathway with my wife. It didn't start out that way because I do have probably a more primarily anxious attachment style. And so generally speaking, the way my brain is wired, I have a fear of abandonment. So think about anxious attachment is we've experienced the goodness of what connection is, and we're afraid we're going to lose it. So maybe as a child, there was an inconsistency about it. So think about my own story where my parents divorced. They loved me greatly, but there was just an inconsistency at times because of how life wouldn't allow them to be with me and those kind of things. So my brain now has written the story that I better become finely attuned to anybody who wants to give separation to me, and I better pull them closer. I better cling to them because if I don't, then they might leave me. So early on in our marriage, I was terrified of Jenny abandoning me. Matter of fact, what I would do is I would actually withhold many of my opinions out of fear that if I give them, I might be too much for her in some way. So an anxious attachment is, I know the goodness of love, I'm going to hold it tight. Avoidant is the idea of I've experienced the pain of love and I don't want to experience that again. So I push people away and I keep everybody at just an arm's length and distance in order to protect my own heart. And so I've written the story, emotions really don't matter. I should be able to fend for myself and take care of myself. I should be my own man. And if I can do that, then I'm less likely to be hurt. And so they might look at a relationship as a danger. They could smother me in some way. And then a disorganized attachment many times is the byproduct of some kind of addiction, abuse, mental illness, an undiagnosed learning disability, maybe within the child that creates a friction with the parents. And so they grow up in a little more unsettled way to where they're actually terrified of their caregiver, even while they want that caregiver's love. And so it creates a very unpredictable kind of response of how people are going to react to life situations.
Sure. Yeah. And you had said in the book that often the same non-secure attachments don't typically date each other. So you wouldn't typically find somebody that has anxious dating somebody that has anxious, or avoidant dating someone with avoidant, because the avoidant people are gonna bail out before either of them gets close. So usually what happens then is you might have an anxious with secure, or an anxious with an avoidant, and that in itself creates a lot of conflict too.
Yeah, there's an attraction that's there. Obviously, you can have any scenario that you want, but it's just more likely. I mean, two avoidant people are probably never going to get married because they're both going to avoid the intimacy of that. Right. And two anxious people, they can date and they can get married. They can have a healthy marriage, but they're less likely to do so because they're probably triggering each other initially. But you think about even why somebody with an anxious pathway would be attracted to somebody with an avoidant pathway. So somebody with an anxious pathway internally feels driven by emotion and almost feels like a child, like an emotional roller coaster, caring so much about what other people think. And then they see this person over there that has a more avoidant pathway that seems so secure, projecting this coolness, and they think to themselves, man, I wish I could be like him, where he doesn't care what anybody thinks, and they're drawn to that appearance of security. Whereas the person, let's say the guy with the avoidant pathway, sees the woman with an anxious pathway and goes, man, I wish I was that in touch with my emotions. I wish I could so freely express whenever I'm angry. And so they're drawn to that expression. But the problem is that now they're both have these non-secure pathways, that which draws us and attracts us to begin with then triggers us for the rest of the marriage until we recognize what's going on and make the journey over into a secure type of love.
Yeah, Kevin, you said something in the book that I think this is so crucial to understand, is that, you know, the type that you have doesn't define you, but it explains. And I think that is so, you hit on this just in marriage, like understanding which pathway you have helps you to navigate your marriage. Because if you don't understand that and you don't have that, you're constantly going to be in conflict.
Yeah, no doubt. I view attachment styles as it's the autopilot of our lives. So of our relationship lives. So we live most of our lives on autopilot. You know, a human being is making 35,000 decisions a day. You don't have the ability. You're not sitting there right now, Ryan, consciously going heartbeat, heartbeat, heartbeat,
right.
breathe, digest. You couldn't do that. Matter of fact, if you start drawing attention to that, it might freak you out a little bit, to be honest with you. Well, we live a lot of our lives that way. We have to. Our brains try to work with an efficiency. And so early on in life, we kind of how our needs are met shapes how we view life, and we just begin to operate in that way. But here's the problem, is what saved us in the past can kill us in the present. And so our attachment style was really how we adapted to our childhoods, and it worked for us. We're alive, we're functioning adults, it worked. But the problem is whenever we start dealing with our present situations through these pathways that have worked, it really can destroy the relationships that we have now. So I think what I'm looking at within love styles is how can you review the autopilot by which you live life and then adjust it to the most healthiest form and function that you can actually have so they can impact your present relationships. I mean, one of the things I say in the book that I think is absolutely true, not as though I say things in the book that I don't think are true, but one of the things that I think is so important is, generally speaking, whenever you have a fight with your spouse, you're having a fight in the present that's primarily about your past. And yet you don't realize it. And so it feels so real in the moment, but what's actually happening is there's something in your past that's being triggered. There's an insecurity that's being triggered, which brings added emotion into what's being experienced in the moment.
Wow. Yeah, that is so good. I mean, it's just that moment, I think, of self-reflection and realizing that. Yeah, that's so good.
I think that takes maturity too and growth. And, you know, for our listeners, that we're proud of you for digging in and wanting to learn and grow. That's why you're listening to this. And this is another tool for doing that. Kevin, I love that in the book you have it listed out by the attachment types and unsecure attachment types you have domains. So here are the 5 different areas and how it will play out in your life, whether it's friendship, romantic love, work, et cetera, et cetera. Here's how it expresses itself as, here are your triggers, here's your default reaction, and here's your healing move. I thought that was so good that you listed the healing move. And then also at the end of each chapter, practice and why it helps. I thought that was great that you gave people tools. So if you're a listener right now and you're thinking, you know, some of that sounds familiar, get the book because it does, you know, you list out tools that I thought were so helpful. So in the book, you gave an illustration towards the end of a couple sitting at a table. And so if you visualize a couple out to eat and you talked about how you can see part of them, the waiter approaches and he thinks, oh, you know, they're really nicely dressed and they have, you know, the lady has this jewelry and her hair's done all nice. But then there's a whole part of them that's hidden underneath the table. And then you walked the readers through that. Can you talk about that illustration and what that represented?
Yeah, this has become extremely helpful with Jenny and I to view every discussion and specifically conflict in this way. And you end up with these 4 quadrants. So we talk about what's above the table and what's below the table. For instance, as we're talking right now, right, I have my hoodie on. You can see those kind of things. You have no idea at this moment if I have on slacks or shorts. You don't know, right?
Or slippers, or
we get the picture of like the sportscaster that's in the coat and tie, and then he stands up and he has shorts on, right?
Yeah.
And so to view yourself, that you have what you are presenting, the words that you're speaking, the body language that you use. But then there's these under the table things that are unseen. And these are our attachment needs that we all need to feel seen, known, valued, and loved. And so think about these 4 quadrants. You have me above the table, what you see and hear, me below the table. I need to be seen, known, valued, loved. You have Jenny above the table. You have Jenny now below the table. And so what I talk about within this is if a couple can begin to get this picture whenever they're having conflict, and to begin to speak to what's going on below the table in your spouse's heart. Because here's what happens. We have these unmet attachment needs, and yet we don't have the security to surface those and to say to our spouse, hey, I feel unseen, unheard, unvalued, unloved right now. So instead, what we do is we protest whatever the trigger was. So we raise a pointed finger of protest and say, the example I use in the book is, I'm on the couch, Jenny walks in, the kitchen's overflowing with dirty dishes. She protests and says, well, I guess you don't care about the dishes. And notice the problem with a protest is it always elevates the situation to be more emotional than what just the situation in and of itself would be, because that's born from what's going on below the table. Well, anytime you have a raised finger of protest, the temptation then for me, or I can raise a finger of protest just as easily too, is for the other person to raise a clenched fist of defense. So Jenny feels unseen, unheard, unvalued, and loved. Instead of surfacing that, she says, well, you don't care about these dishes. Now I feel unseen, shamed. Instead of speaking to her true need, I now raise a defense. Well, you don't know what I've been through and what I've been doing. Now notice this. She feels unseen, unheard, unvalued, and loved. She raised a protest to get me to see what she's feeling. When I defend myself, she actually feels even more unseen, unheard, unvalued, unloved, which causes her to up the ante and raise a bigger protest. Well, you never care about any of these things, which makes me feel even more shamed below the table. So I double down on my defense, where I either become stronger at my defense or I just emotionally shut down, which either way, I'm still not seeing her, making her feel even more unseen, unheard, unvalued, and loved. And so one thing I say is the problem with a pointed finger of protest or a clenched fist of defense is you can't hold a hand with either one of them. And so what we need to do now is begin to look at what's going on below the table. So if Jenny protests in some way, I need to hear the issue, but then I need to ask myself, what is she feeling in this moment that's causing this protest to come my way? And can I, instead of getting defensive, can I actually woo more of her heart out onto the table? Oh my goodness, that must make you feel unseen, unheard, unvalued, unloved. What is that like? What are other times that I do that? Because that's the last thing I would ever want to. What are the times in which I make you feel heard, seen, valued, and loved? And notice this. As I begin to woo her heart out on the table instead of defending my own, I'm now seeing her, giving her the very thing that she needs. And here's the amazing thing. If I do that long enough, she feels seen, known, valued, and loved enough that she actually starts wooing my heart out onto the table and begins to say, well, what are the times in which I do this to you? And now what happens is, if we can form that attachment connection, then we can come back to the general issue of how all this got started and say, all right, how do we solve this? You see, here's the thing about the difference between healthy couples and unhealthy couples is not if they fight. Everybody fights. The difference is a healthy couple tries to solve an issue when they feel emotionally connected. And if they don't feel emotionally connected, they will connect first, then solve the issue. An unhealthy couple attempts to solve an issue despite feeling detached from each other. And at that moment, you are not in an emotional place that you can actually solve the issue. And so it's that healthy couples fight at the right time. Unhealthy couples fight at the wrong time.
That's really good. I've heard before, like, connect before you correct with parenting. And it kind of reminds me of that. You're connecting on a heart level before you address the issue. Kevin, that is the example that we kind of laughed about. Ryan's on the couch reading and I'm seeing the stack of things. And it's, like, gosh, you really look comfortable out there reading as, all these dishes. But, and Ryan, I feel like you're very secure. So usually you're great at what's going on, where you get to the root of the needs and you see that it's really not about the dishes. There's, we've been running in different directions or haven't connected. And I feel like sometimes I maybe lean a little more anxious, but you being so secure, I feel like has made me more secure too in how we communicate, because we're not entering into that infinity loop where we're just badgering each other. He usually is able to tell when, okay, Michelle's feeling unseen, unheard, unvalued, unloved. I need to go talk to her about this. And you gave the example about how Jenny, the next day, she could be, walking in, singing, AirPods in, listening to worship music, doing dishes, and the same pile of dishes doesn't bother her, but it's because she has now felt seen, heard, loved, valued, and you've gotten to the root of those things.
No, absolutely. When our attachment needs are met, we have what Dan Siegel would call a much wider window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance is just this window in which we can take in information, we can respond to disagreements, we're not threatened in any way. And when our attachment needs are met, our window of tolerance is very wide. And so one thing that Love Styles really does is it helps explain why one comment can cause a fight and that same comment later can cause a laugh. And it begins to explain what's going on underneath the table, underneath ourselves, that's creating this sometimes opposite response that we would expect. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. Kevin, I love the concept of talking about, Michelle pointed to this idea of that infinity loop. Where you said this, like a pointed finger, a protest, and like it just goes round and round and round. And like, I feel like we've had moments like that where it's just like, okay, we just got to get out of this. Like, what is really going on? Because it just continues.
Yeah.
And you just dig in more, and there's more protests, there's more, like, all of that.
I feel like we've gotten really good at recognizing that, though. Like, hey, what's really going on?
Right,
which, has come with 15 years. But.
Exactly right. Yeah. I think that's where we continue to grow. We continue to understand, each other. And some of this, I think this is so good. Kevin, so, we're talking a lot about this. As you kind of close the book, you give us like a pathway forward. What does this look like for couples?
Yeah, I think the great news here is this, that we all have some of these non-secure forms and pathways in our lives. It may not be true of our spouse, but maybe with our children, with our parents, with coworkers. We all of us, there are ways in which we don't love the way that we should love, or we don't receive love the way that we should receive love. Here's the great news. Secular psychology says that you're not stuck in these patterns. You can learn security, but the gospel has long explained it, that there can be transformation. And let's face it, one of the tasks of the church is that we're learning to be loved and to love. And I would say that's one of the aspects of what marriage is I am learning how to be loved by Jenny and then to love her in response. And so the pathway forward really is to go through a series of kind of self-exploration of who am I. I have a free assessment that your readers can take, that in 13 questions, it can begin to show what are some of my pathways that might be unhealthy. And then you just start to ask the questions, who am I and how did I become me? What might have shaped my formation in why I respond in such a way? I mean, I preached this weekend on Martha and Mary at the meal with Jesus. Why is Martha so emotionally distraught over the fact that Mary isn't helping her? Well, chances are it's that Martha grew up in a house in which the only way you could receive love was to earn it. You had to bring value to the table in some way. And so when Jesus walked in that door that day, she went after earning the love and the favor of Jesus, which was actually something she could only receive and not earn. And so Jesus calls her into a secure way. So I think we discover who we are, what our patterns are, and then we begin to get fixated on what secure love truly looks like, and try to begin to respond in that way in every relationship we have, to such an extent that I have a 17-year-old son, 20-year-old daughter, and let's say there's some friction with my son. I'll think to myself, what is the secure response to him in this moment? So I recognize what my tendency is, anxious attachment. My tendency is to cater to him, to take care of him, but to think, no, that's not what secure love looks like. What is a secure response to him in this moment? And then literally, your brain can rewire itself to where you can form these new habits. So here's basically what I say in the book. The greatest wounds in life were caused by people who were supposed to love you and didn't. And yet Jesus so often heals those wounds by pouring his love through somebody who didn't have to love you and yet chose to do so. And first and foremost, that's Jesus. But then secondarily, that's Jenny. And as Jenny loves me well, I mean, Michelle, you talked about it. Ryan is so secure, right? That has a formation impact and effect on who you are.
Yeah.
And literally, as we start walking through a secure attachment, it can change how we love. You love today the way you were loved yesterday, but you will love tomorrow the way you choose to love today. And this book is about making better choices.
Will you say that again? That was really deep. Loving yesterday and today.
You love today the way you were loved yesterday, but you will love tomorrow the way you choose to love today. And so as you begin to choose a secure pathway of love, that eventually will become the main pathway that you have.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Do you have feedback on that, Ryan?
I mean, Kevin, one of the things I love, and it was like the last thing that I wrote down, and I think it's so, attachment is adaptive. You wrote that in the book. And
oh my gosh, I'm on that page right now. I was just going to quote that too.
And it's so good because it's so much about recognizing who you are, who you've been, but that doesn't mean that's who you will be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so incredible of that this is adaptive, that you can change this.
Yeah. But here's the dangerous news to me, Ryan, is that without awareness, attachment probably is who you will be. And so until we pause and recognize how our past has impacted us and how it continues, it's just our autopilot. And what happens is we'll never change because it just feels so right, because this is how life is. And we're shocked when somebody else has a different perspective. And yet once you begin to look at, hey, what from my past was really good and what actually needs to change, then suddenly that empowers you now to live a different life. One of my favorite stories about the book is within the last couple of years, I've walked with a couple people in their 40s, never married, always wanted to be married. And yet as we got to look at their relationship history, they were getting right to the edge of intimacy and then running. Well, both of them had a more avoidant pathway and they didn't recognize it. As they became aware of where that came from, of how it was being expressed within their life, the next time they got in a very meaningful relationship, they still felt the desire to run, but now they could learn, hey, when I feel the desire to run, I should actually lean in. And as they leaned in, now both of those individuals in separate relationships are happily married and have been so for a little bit of time. And that's solely from a discovery through the principles of love styles.
That's so amazing. That's so amazing. And I was going to ask, is it possible that a person could have these show up in certain areas, not all of them? So I said earlier that I think I can tend to be a little anxious, but I realized that it's mostly with work. I think that is where it manifests the most. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good for me to know, because I don't need to people please. I don't need to worry about somebody else's opinion. Of course, I want to do a good job, but I need to have that internal validation and that boundary setting. And sometimes that does lead me to overwork and burn myself out because I'm just trying so hard to earn this. And I was like, that line right there is me. I don't think it shows up in other ways in those different categories necessarily, but the work one, I was like, I think that does fit me.
Yeah, so we look at these. These are not definitions of who we are. These are more definitions of where relationships currently are. And so you don't look at, oh, I'm securely attached or I'm anxiously attached. It's not that. It's my relationship with Jenny is a secure attachment. My relationship maybe with this person is a non-secure attachment. Now, how can I grow that relationship? So it's not surprising to me at all, Michelle, that especially within a work concept. Now, where does that come from? We could look at your past and begin to see maybe where an authority figure was in your life. You felt a need or a pressure to prove yourself. Maybe you never felt worthy enough. Or I mean, all those things could be at play. You could discover that for yourself. But it's not surprising that in one area of life, man, you're totally secure. In this other area, you tend to approach it in a more anxious pathway because those relationships at this moment are that way because they're triggering on something from your past.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really profound. Kevin, thank you so much for all of this today. And for our listeners, this is a shorter read. It's so chock full of wisdom. I think it took each of us around 3 hours to read. So what a great investment in your relationship to read this. And like Kevin said, you can change, but it takes that awareness. So this is the first step, listening today and then getting the book. We have some copies to give away.
Yeah.
Here's where we get to make an executive decision. Our marriage pastor here, Chris, said we can give 3 to 5 copies away. And I don't know, I feel like we should we do 5?
Let's do 5.
Let's do 5. And the great news is that, Kevin, you have autographed these copies.
Well, the value just got less. Then.
Yeah.
Double, triple, quadruple value. We are excited to give these away. So I think what we'll do is we are going to have our listeners email a takeaway in for winning one of these books. So we'll do the first 5 to listen to the show to completion, and you are going to email our team at marriage@celebrate.church. So marriage@celebrate.church with one takeaway from the show, how are you going to implement it in your relationship, and we will get you a copy of this book. So first 5. Also, don't assume that those 5 have been taken. I feel like sometimes people think, oh, they probably already got it. You never know.
Never know.
Take the time, send the email, and so we'll do that. We'll also put our email in the show notes along with that assessment that Kevin talked about. He sent that to our team. We'll get that linked so you can do. Kevin, did you say it was a 13-point assessment or
13 questions? It takes maybe 3 minutes.
Perfect. And this has been wildly popular with people so far.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No doubt.
Okay. We have the websites listed as well. And guys, any final parting thoughts for our listeners today? This has been so good.
Kevin, one of the, I think I'll close with this, and you just hit on it, but I think that self-reflection, that self-work of going through, do the assessment, go through, like, look at this and see where you are. Because so many of the stories, like, this is part of why, like, I told Michelle, I'm like, I need to go back through this because, you think things are normal. Like, oh, I grew up in a normal household and all of these things. So many of the stories in the book start with that. Well, I grew up in a normal household and such. And it takes the work. It takes the work to go through and be like, okay, I need to identify, where my relationships are, how I'm reacting, all of these things. Understanding that love style is so crucial. And it just takes that work.
Yeah, no doubt. And here's the thing. It's worth it. It's a little bit of pain now, but it'll save you from so much pain later. Well, whereas to avoid it now feels easier, but it will guarantee a pain that's later.
That's good. What a perfect gift for Valentine's to work on your relationship. So get the book. You can find these on Amazon. I didn't say that. I should say that now. You can get them on Amazon. We will also link that. So go to our show notes and you can just click on that link and buy the book. So Love Styles, Kevin A. Thompson. Kevin, thank you so much for being back on our show today. It's been so good.
Hey, thank y'all. Can't wait to see you next time.
And also, can you soak up some of that California sun for us? Because it is frigid here.
Yes.
So we would appreciate that. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to our listeners. We are so glad that you have took this time to invest in your relationship. We're so proud of you for doing that. Like we said, we have a ton of resources we will put in today's show notes. If you don't have a church home, we would love to have you join us here at celebrate.church. Our location is there, along with the ability to watch online. We thank you and we hope you have a great week.
Have a great week.